Hey, this is Jeremy Cowart, and you can hear my story in episode 100. But in the meantime, enjoy this new episode from Kyle and Sean.
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This is episode 102. Thank you for listening and thank you for sharing. We know a lot of you out there share the episode with your friends and family, and that's how things grow and that's how the word gets out. So thank you so much for that. Sean, what is...
They're essentially watering our garden.
Watering our garden, I like that.
I don't know where that comes from. But thank you for watering our garden.
Nice.
I feel really weird right now from just saying that. Anyway.
Yeah, is that like a euphemism or something?
I don't know. But I feel like I might be like Maya Angelou or something right now.
Nice. Sean, what's going on lately?
So before we roll too far, Kyle, I do want to just kind of rehash or revisit a travel scenario I experienced a few weeks ago. And most of our listeners, especially if they follow me on social media or read my columns on FA News, they're going to know this. So I don't want to rehash the entire story, but a lot of people know, and you know, I took a trip, and on the way home, the wheelchair I was using was destroyed, right? It fell apart. I assume it got banged around a little bit, or maybe it wasn't secured in the bulkhead of the cargo area of the airplane and, you know, fell over and whatever. Okay, besides all that, what I really want to talk about is the way the remedy is being handled. To my surprise, the airline has actually been on top of it, right? They were a little confused at first. They didn't understand why they were calling me. They didn't know what was going on. Well, because I don't own a wheelchair, the wheelchair I had been using since leaving the rehab facility in Pennsylvania was a loaner from a wheelchair company who is supposedly working on a permanent chair for me, right? Building it and going through insurance and all that.
Okay.
So I fly home. I'm using this loaner for a couple of months. Then I take this trip. I come home. The loaner gets beat up to a point where I can't use it.
Like beat up, like literally broken apart.
Fell apart, yeah, like not functioning.
Yeah.
There's pictures. Go find me on Instagram or Facebook. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway. So I'm dealing with the airline, and I'm like, you know, they're asking, do you have a backup chair, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, this chair isn't even mine. So I encourage them to call the wheelchair, the owner of this chair, and talk to them about repairing or replacing and blah, blah, blah. They have an office not too far from the airport. I'm sure they can help figure it out much more than I can. So they called this company gets involved, and this company calls me a couple times, and great. About a week later, they deliver a temporary replacement loaner, right?
Okay.
So the whole time, I'm like, all right, cool. We're talking on the phone. They're going to bring me a replacement, and they're going to pick up the airline chair that I took home to use. Great. They're going to deliver it back to the airline or the airport, and we're good. So the driver comes with the new replacement loaner, and he's like, hey, I'm here. Come get your chair. So I come out, and I'm like, cool. We'll just swap, right? You're taking this one, and I'll get that one. He's like, That's not in my notes to take that chair, so I can't take it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, nobody, like, I don't know that as a plan.
Not my
so I'm
job.
Really not. Yeah, I'm not. But I think it was more of I'm not allowed to take it because I don't know where to go with it. So I get it. Not his field of responsibilities.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, so I'll just hang on to it. Well, I mean, yeah, you can call the airline. I'm not doing anything. Like, this is not my job, right? I'm like, I'm not going to put in extra effort here.
Yeah.
So now I have 2 wheelchairs.
All
one
right. Score.
for the wheelchair company, one for the airline. Well, the wheelchair company called me twice last week to remind me that I need to come in to get fitted for my replacement. And I'm like, you already gave it to me. I'm not coming in. Oh, all that to say, I still have 2 wheelchairs. I didn't show up to a supposed appointment that I had, and they're supposed to deliver me another chair tomorrow.
Oh,
and
you
I'm
have
anxious
3.
to see what happens.
So can you just like sell one of them or 2 of them on eBay when you get the new one, or what?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, but I'm slowly losing hope and faith in this wheelchair company. It's diminishing every day. Anyway, that's my whole wheelchair story.
All right. Well,
At least I'm getting around.
yeah,
So
be
I'm-
sure to keep us updated. It sounds like things are moving. Maybe, I mean, not always
Well,
in
things
the right
are moving.
direction.
It's just, we're like in a hamster wheel, but nothing is. The hamster wheel is rotating, so at least that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about how we make decisions, how we weigh our options. We think about, we can go back to this wheelchair story, and in the moment where I'm trying to get off an airplane and I can't, I had some choices to make and reactions to decide on what to demonstrate. And I think, Kyle, you talked about in a few episodes or last season, your transition into a power wheelchair, and then recently your transition to a van that has an accessible ramp.
Right.
So obviously, in everything we do, we're always up against choices and options, and we all have decisions to make every day. So what I thought might be a topic to talk about for a few minutes between you and I is just talking about how we weigh those options or how we make our decisions.
Yeah, I like it because it's something that we all encounter every single day, right? And I think
Totally.
it's good. We're not here to say somebody should do this or that, but it's great to talk about how we make decisions so that we can evaluate it in our own heads.
Totally. And whether you're reading a book or listening to this podcast or another, all these sorts of conversations are just aimed at giving you other tools in that toolbox, if you will, to navigate whatever you're up against. In fact, I'm thinking right now, in our world, there's a very sensitive topic of what do we do in the face of COVID-19 or the coronavirus.
Right.
And although this episode it's not meant to be all things virus, but there are a lot of choices in this, whether you're a rare disease family or a fully able-bodied individual or family, you have choices to make. Some people are choosing to cancel trips. Large conference organizers are choosing to cancel conferences. In fact, the big one in the news recently, South by Southwest, that big festival, they've canceled. And these are major decisions. So I'm curious, in the face of decisions like that, how does one make that decision? Like, how do you land on the choice you end up making?
Yep.
Especially when I think of that virus, I know of a big conference in the rare disease space was canceled, and that's a bummer to people attending, right? Because you usually pay money to register or at least a hotel and, all those little expenses.
Yeah.
When a conference cancels, I'm assuming not everybody gets a refund.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you react to that? How do you handle the expenses involved?
Well, when you're talking about weighing choices, weighing options, think about like part of the conference you were talking about was scientific conference, and where they bring in international scientists from all over the world. And those conferences are focused on advancing the field, like on a large scale, moving the ideas forward that everyone has about how to treat and cure this disease. And when those things don't happen, like that, maybe that set us back, and that's a big risk to weigh against whatever we're up against,
Yeah, and I think that right there actually is the point of the conversation today. At some level, you could think, okay, the science is going to be set back because we didn't all get together. But then the other side of the coin is there's a possibility that if we get together, we still get set back because a lot of people get sick, or some maybe lose their lose their lives. So the risk is on either side of the coin, I guess. So what I'm curious about is how you, Kyle, how do you weigh out the choices? You're somebody that travels all the time.
Right.
Are you putting your travels on hold? Are you still what are you doing personally to either contribute or raise awareness or concern for your own self?
That's a really tough question. A few things that I weigh when I'm making a choice is, obviously the value of whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm going to, but also the overall, my contribution to society. Maybe one of those contributions is to first do no harm, right? And so, maybe even if one of the things I think about is, even if the virus doesn't affect me personally, maybe I might be a carrier in some way, right? And spread to other people and contribute to the problem. So I think it's a really hard thing because we have to remove our own personal things and see it from a higher level of how does this contribute to society. And maybe that's a conflict in a lot of different areas, but it's really specific right now and really apparent right now.
Yeah, and I think there's maybe we should clarify it now just briefly. I don't know that I think of a right or wrong answer. I think it's just open to dialogue, right? But I also want to point out that this episode, this particular recording, is 2 weeks old. So by the time it's live, 1 week, so about 8 days, before listeners are hearing it, we just want you to know we recorded this 8 days prior. I wanted to point that out because, especially right now with the virus, things change every day.
Yeah.
So I want to be careful that we don't seem like we're outdated or talking about things that don't apply anymore or whatever. But that reminds me, a few days ago, the NBA talked about preparing the entire franchise to play games without a crowd. Saying you only play a game with essential people and no crowds, all for the sake of, quote unquote, protecting the public from being in such an environment. And so hearing you talk, I also think of, self-selection, right? If you choose to stay home because you don't want to be a part of the concern or the problem, even though you're not sick or feeling ill, in a sense, you're self-selecting and quarantining yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that goes into people's choices to either travel or not travel, or work or not work, and all that stuff. So anyway, this is obviously becoming all things virus, which is fine.
What you
But
just said, this is not what it is.
Yeah, it's not meant to be.
Right.
But I wonder, the whole idea is to talk about how you weigh out choices. I think if I were sick, it's easy. Stay home. If I'm feeling a fever, then I obviously I need the rest, and I don't want to get anybody else sick, so I'm going to stay home. That's easy. But it's not always black and white. It's not always an easy choice.
Yeah.
So whether you're talking about something related to your long-term care, or a current virus, or your long-term safety, or a career, I think what we want to talk about today, Kyle, is how you and I weigh out our choices, if you will.
So maybe we can talk about a few specific examples from our lives, specifically dealing with our disabilities that presented options to us, and we had to really weigh them out to figure out what was the right thing to do. And you mentioned it earlier with my van. And I really think that the van is an example for me of just the progression of my disease and really coming to grips with it multiple times. I mean, shoot, I think it really goes back to one of the biggest things was sitting down in a wheelchair, right? And then getting a van. And then getting a power chair, and then getting a van with a wheelchair ramp. Like, it's a continuous decision, right? But the overall things that I'm thinking about when I'm coming up against all these specific changes in my life is what am I trying to do with my life? What am I trying to do in the short term, and maybe also the long term? And how does this affect my ability to get those things done? And you know what? This van, even though there's a lot of emotion in this decision, and I did put it off for quite a long time, ultimately I made the decision because I know that this van is going to improve my mobility and help me get the things done that I want to get done.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of conversations we've had with you and other guests where when you finally get to a point where you actually realize how much more independence comes with such a choice or a piece of equipment. You're able to move around a little bit more on your own. You're able to show up on your own without always having to get help. So that's one thing I think of. Sure, maybe parts of it are challenging and emotionally difficult, but you're probably kind of prolonging life a little bit in a sense, not like, life or death life, but the quality.
Right.
Quality.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think in making these decisions is to at least periodically attempt to remove emotion from the situation completely and try to see it objectively and make a decision based on facts instead of how you feel, because those things oftentimes are conflicting. And maybe that's what is the most difficult thing about making a decision like this.
Yeah, that's true. I think, there's always good questions probably to help weigh out options or decisions. So besides that question, what are some others that you think might be valuable to consider before somebody takes action?
One of the things that I ask myself when I'm up against a decision is something I mentioned before when I was talking about my story about the wheelchair and the van and all that, is does this decision change my goal, or does it just change the way I get there? And that's something that I ask myself constantly, and it really helps reframe my decisions and the way I can move forward.
Yeah, I think that helps keep the end game in mind, right? Everybody, no matter what it is, whether you're talking about school, career, car, getting from point A to point B, everybody has this picture of what life is supposed to be like, right? And probably 70, 80, 90% of us, that picture isn't always exactly how life unfolds. Something ends up changing that picture, whether it's a disease or a disability, or maybe you get pregnant and you didn't expect to,
Right.
and a kid changes everything, right? Or bills or a car, or whatever the issue might be. So I think that's probably huge. Keep the end result in mind. What are you hoping for? What are you going for? What's the long-term goal? And are you still going to be able to accomplish that?
Right.
Or does this require a different approach? I think that's a wonderful question.
Is there an example, a recent example in your life that kind of helps you illustrate how you weigh your options?
Yeah, I think related to that question, obviously a long-term goal is being financially independent, right? Being able to earn money and have some investment and buy a house and, just be stable.
Right.
And obviously the way a lot of us do that is work, and you show up to work and you get paid for your time.
Yeah.
And I recently went back to work after my broken femur and was doing full-time for the first month, and began to wrestle with the idea that maybe I had taken on too much in jumping back in full swing. So I had to start thinking maybe full-time work right now isn't the best option physically or emotionally. I began to realize that my PT began to suffer and my exercise began to suffer, and I found myself completely exhausted every day. So I would go to work, spend 8 to 10 hours away from home, and then come home and just be completely drained. Didn't even want to look at emails or cook food. I just wanted to go to bed.
Yeah.
And I began to realize the effect that was having on my mindset, my attitude, and of course my output, whether at work or at home. Everything began to suffer. And I realized that I was doing this all for the sake of that full potential paycheck. And I had to really consider, okay, the long-term goal and the short-term goal, or the purpose. If I continue doing what I'm doing, is it really going to be fulfilling, or am I really dragging out something that doesn't need to be drug on? Or
Yep.
yeah, is that a word? Drug on? Dragged on?
Something like that.
I'm not sure. I feel like when you say drug on, it could have a different meaning.
Yeah.
Whatever the case. I just realized I felt like I was treading water.
Yeah.
And I knew when you start thinking about treading water, you can only do that for so long, right? If you're in a pool or out in the ocean or river, at some point, something's got to give. Either you've got to reach the shore, or you're not going to be able to tread anymore. And so I had to make that choice of having to scale back a little bit so that my dividends right now in paying into rest and exercise and PT would have a stronger long-term effect than showing up for work 40 hours a week would have right now.
Yep. Yeah, you talk about treading water, and I think that's a really great metaphor, because you're working really hard, right? But you're not going anywhere. You're not getting any closer to your goal. And so maybe sometimes you need to take a step back, maybe even get out of the pool or whatever and dive in, right? And figure out what a better approach is.
And of course, that was a really hard decision because I'm essentially having to give up some income, right?
Right.
And sure, it's temporary and it's only going to be a short time, but not everybody has that flexibility or feels
Right.
comfortable doing that. So I think with that example, I want to encourage our listeners to, you spoke about removing the emotion.
Yeah.
And I would encourage listeners to remove the financial component just in your head. So I'm not saying, drop all your income, but I'm saying pose the question to yourself as if money wasn't a concern. Because I had to realize at some point my health and mental stability, I felt like it had to outweigh wages at some point.
Right.
And I had for so long, not allowed it to do so.
Yeah.
It's why one of the questions I'm beginning to ask myself, or kind of ask myself infrequently, is if money weren't an issue, what decision would I make?
Yeah, I love using something like that, like a technique. Like you can apply this principle in your mind and it helps you change the way you think about it, right? And maybe it helps bring you out of the place where you're only thinking about emotion. You're thinking about, oh my gosh, I have a commitment to myself to support myself and I need to make this money. Well, all of a sudden, let's think about it a little differently. What if money was not a problem? Okay, that takes that emotion out of it. And, let's kind of think about it a little differently. Maybe it's not money for everyone. Maybe it's some other element that you have to take out of the situation. Just think about it differently in order to think about it objectively and move forward.
Yeah, I think automatically I'm thinking of all the different times and stories I've heard of people having babies and not feeling prepared.
Yeah.
And they do fine. Like,
Right.
you figure it out, right? You make it work.
Sean, I think back to our interview with Jeremy Cowart, episode 100, and one of the things that he said about ideas and how he moves forward with ideas, and one of the things is that he talks to his wife and his close friends about his ideas before he decides to move forward, just to kind of weigh the options and see. Partly, he's probably, as he articulates these, he's solidifying what he thinks about them, but then he also gets feedback from his wife and his close friends and figures out what to do.
Yeah, there's probably value in that type of community where they know you, they know your heart, your goals, what you're doing, and what you want to do. And people can be, maybe they're a little more objective than we are because, like you said, we could be so emotionally attached to an idea or to a program or a routine that we fail to see it the way others do. So yeah, just inviting people you trust that are close to you to weigh in on that, I think helps us make decisions. So yeah, I love that. That comes to mind. So I guess as a sort of recap and a way to wrap up this rambling that we've been on, we know that everybody's up against some really tough choices pretty regularly, if not every day. And here on the Two Disabled Dudes, we're sharing tips on how we tackle decisions. Kyle would encourage you to remove the emotion, kind of think objectively. I would encourage you to, and even Kyle too, what's the long-term goal? And is it still obtainable? Just maybe differently or slowed down a little bit? And then ask yourself what you would do if money weren't an issue. And then, like Jeremy encouraged, seek out some trusted advice, whether it's a choice or decision or an idea. I think it's always good to get somebody else to weigh in. So I'm curious what you, our listeners, do when you're up against a tough decision or choice. What are some of the techniques you employ? would love to read your comments online or an email or Facebook, whatever it may be. Would encourage you to give us your tips and tricks for that, because we all know decisions and choices will always be prevalent in life. So we're always open to more ideas and tips on that.
Perfect. Sean, thank you so much for the awesome conversation today. I think we should wrap up like we always do with a little gratitude and our thank you notes. Who do you have to thank today?
Well, today I'm going to thank actually a good friend of mine. And I just realized that I always say actually before the name, as if everybody should be surprised that I'm going to thank this person.
And you're throwing a little curveball every time.
I'm making a mental note. I don't know why I do that. So anyway, I'm going to thank my friend and coworker, Umberto. Umberto and I get to work together, same team, but we only see each other maybe once every other week, 2 different areas. Same age, and he always listens to our show. So shout out to Umberto, who not only is a loyal fan, but a really good friend, and just celebrated a birthday. So happy birthday. Umberto, thank you for being consistently positive. Your constant smile and encouraging words make my days better. I'm fortunate to know you and to work with you. And I'm so thankful that you always listen to our show. Thank you, Umberto.
All right, nice. So my thank you note is to my dry cleaning guy. And I have to admit that I don't even know his name, and I feel pretty terrible about that.
Wow.
Because he's super awesome. And so maybe I'll figure out a way to find out his name.
It's probably a good idea. I mean, if you go to the same place every time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here we go. Dear dry cleaning guy, thank you for always remembering my name and then saying it at least 5 times every time I see you. Even on the cold mornings, you deliver my clean shirts to the curb when I pull up. Always with a smile, no matter what is going on in your day. You lift my spirits every time. And that is a real sincere thank you, and I will find out what his name is.
I'm curious if he says your name a bunch because that's personality and that's just kind of a habit, or if he says it a bunch because he knows you don't know his name. And it's kind of a way to remind you, like, you're a jerk.
Yeah, that's...
because I know you're... granted, it's easier for him. He types it in and you come up every time, but...
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
He also has, like, 1 million people that come in. And I can see that he probably knows everyone's name. It's so crazy.
Yeah. I think... You're right. You've got some work to do, so figure it out. Like always, Kyle and I believe in gratitude, and we believe in the power of what gratitude can do to our mindset. So something we've started doing this season is sharing those thank you notes. We'd encourage you to do the same.
Until next time, keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisabled.com and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Special thanks to our friend and audio producer, Jake Tompkins.